A building inspector finds a tunnel inside KFC, but when he realized what was on the other side, he stopped cold. 2018, San Luis, Arizona. John Irwin entered the abandoned KFC. It was a shell of a building, crisscrossed by a highway, a border wall with Mexico, and miles of sun-baked desert. Now abandoned, the all-too-familiar fast food colors and hallmarks decorated the walls, while a thin coat of dust covered the tile floors. The booths had been stripped, but the old deep fat fryers were rotting behind the counter. Years of looters had cherry-picked what they wanted. As Irwin made his way towards the back of the ghostly restaurant, he rounded a corner and his flashlight fell on something that made him freeze. A few years ago, San Luis had seen much of its crime drop. It had reached a point where there was particularly no crime whatsoever. Rumors had credited a masked vigilante who roamed the city at night. They said he must have been young. He was short and ran with a slight gait. His back was just slightly hunched. Still, enough grainy footage of him taking down criminals had circulated to the point where people were nervous about this masked crusader. Police searched, but could never find him. John Irwin thought little of the masked hero. He was a quiet man and often drew attention for being lanky and extremely tall. For Irwin, inspecting buildings was his dream job. Irwin's years as a building inspector for the city meant he saw some pretty wacky stuff. Still, he'll never forget the day he pulled into the KFC and met Yuma resident Ivan Lopez to check out the old KFC property. The city was considering purchasing the property, and Ivan was the seller. Irwin walked up to his dusty window and barely noticed the small young man until he was standing right in front of the window. Ivan's face looked gray as he clutched the steering wheel through sweaty knuckles. Ivan wouldn't say much, just that the doors to the restaurant were open if he wanted to walk around. Irwin nodded and continued towards the building. As he reached the front doors, he got an eerie feeling. This day would change Irwin's life forever. But this was just the beginning. Months prior, Irwin was busy inspecting a number of different properties in the area. The KFC had fallen to the wayside, as most buyers had not looked at the property in a few years. When Lopez called him up and let him know he wanted to get a building inspector out so they could appraise the property, Irwin let him know it would be a while. Irwin's job involved inspecting various aspects of the property and making sure it was up to code. Once it was determined it was ready to sell, Lopez would be allowed to put it back on the market. The local rumor mill had gone full tilt, speculating about eerie lights going on and off at the KFC and cars drifting in and out of the lot occasionally. While most residents figured late-night blasting and drilling meant the chain was going to reopen its doors, Irwin wasn't so sure. Flash forward, Lopez strangely maintained that he would be waiting outside while Irwin went in. He finally decided he'd go in without Lopez and drew his flashlight. He lit up the bubbling red candy stripes along the walls. Something shifted, and Irwin spun around. His light fell on the creepy grin of the Colonel painted on the front door. One steel-toed boot after another, he walked through the restaurant. At the very back, a door marked Supply Closet hung slightly off its hinges. Lopez paused and trained his flashlight on the door, then crept forward. He barreled into the room, aiming everywhere he could. Finally, he trained his flashlight at the floor to find an 8-inch hole. He immediately pulled out his phone to take a photo of the damage. Minutes later, he had broken away chips of plaster and concrete to get a better look of the deep and dark hole beneath. Dust had settled to reveal a deep and echoey shaft. Irwin went in first with his trusty flashlight. Hundreds of planks were buried in the walls, maintaining the structure. It was clear, whatever this tunnel was, it wasn't short. The passageway was 3 feet wide and 5 feet tall and very dark. Irwin had heard stories of tunnels that went across the border, but knew this was something else entirely. A rope laid at the entrance to the tunnel, and it seemed to go all the way to whatever other side this tunnel led. Suddenly, the sound of footsteps were heard. He froze. The footsteps echoing back were getting quieter. They were scattered and rushed. Whoever it was, they were running away. Irwin knew this tunnel must be used frequently. He began down the long, dark tunnel. Its endless wood beam columns and carved dirt seemed to draw him further and further in. Just as it felt like the tunnel was getting so small that he'd have to drop to his knees and crawl, then it would suddenly open up wide again to the point he could hardly touch the ceiling. It seemed to go on and on like this for some time. Irwin stopped and looked both ways. As he looked back, he got the sudden impending feeling that he had gotten himself turned around. He became so claustrophobic that he had to drop to his knees, close his eyes, and take a deep breath. Soon, he corrected his direction and continued onward. As Irwin reached the end of the tunnel, he discovered a ladder that led up to a trap door in the ceiling. Irwin climbed up and gently pushed open the door. He froze and peered out. Just above was a massive cave-like room. He climbed up into the room and shined his flashlight around. In the corner, a big multi-monitor computer monitor glowed. A cape and mask hung on the wall beside the monitors. Irwin realized immediately where he was. The vigilante who had begun solving crimes in San Luis must have used this as his lair. Irwin suddenly felt himself drawn to the mask and cape. He strolled towards it, almost paralyzed. He picked up the mask and slipped it over his head. He knew what he had to do. When Irwin came back outside wearing the mask, it was already dark. He spotted Ivan's face in the rearview mirror of his young truck. The young man nodded and drove off. It was Irwin's time to be the hero of San Luis. If you enjoyed this story, be sure to like, comment, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss out on any new content. This was the story of a building inspector finding a tunnel inside a KFC and stopping cold when he realized who was on the other side. Thank you very much for watching, and have a good day.